Hey man, by the way, side note,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I've been missing out on playing Minecraft. I just bought it today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fucking addicted, bro.
You love
I
it?
should
You
be
want to hear
addicted
something
to
funny?
what?
Yesterday, I had a problem for the last few days trying to log into my Minecraft account. I was so confused, so I did a
Mm-hmm.
password reset, and I had to log in, and I find that my username's been changed and my skin's been changed, and I'm on
Oh
live on
shit.
Mindwave's stream, like talking about it, and we look up the username, and it's a Russian YouTube channel. So
Oh
some fucking Russian
shit.
kid hacked my Minecraft account called It's Forzy,
Wow.
and yeah, and now I don't know, man. The Russians are after me.
Dude, I had that happen to so get this, I had something similar happen to my Rockstar account
Mm-hmm.
where they changed my password, they changed my username, and it gets better. They changed the default language. So when I went in to reset my shit, it was all Russian. Bro, I couldn't understand shit, and I was like trying so hard to figure out how to get my password reset, but they fucking took it a step forward and fucking changed the default language, so I couldn't understand shit.
He just fucking. So I do. Do I want gibberish, or gibberish? Uh,
Exactly. I'm like, damn, man, I can't figure this shit out.
that's that's really fucking funny. Oh fuck.
Yeah, man, it's insane.
Oh my god. So Oh, did you I want to talk about a new story. I don't know if you heard about it. One second. Shit, I can't
No,
seem to. Nah,
if you can't, we can do voice. It doesn't matter. I don't want. I know you're in the middle of doing your stuff. If you want, we can just do voice. I'm
let
not
me see if
tripping.
I can get it working. If not, we can just do
Sure,
voice.
sure,
Did
not a
you
problem.
hear about the Hobby Lobby thing going on right now?
I heard about them like closing and then they were stayed open because they were considered essential, and then like they found out, oh, we're not essential, so they closed it, and then they said, oh, we are essential, and so they opened it up again. But
Yep.
because they did that, it caused a big lawsuit or some shit like that.
Okay, so my story is a lot bigger, a lot brighter,
Sure.
and pretty great. Have you
Oh,
ever heard
fun.
about the time Hobby Lobby smuggled over 3,800 artifacts out of Iraq through illegal smuggling rings?
I have it.
You haven't?
I've not
You
heard
have
about
not
that.
heard that story? You've not heard that amazing event
No,
that took
no.
place? Okay, so do you want to run down?
You can give me the shortened version, whatever you feel is necessary.
So basically, in 2010, Hobby Lobby decided to buy over 3,000 artifacts from Iraq, right? Which were
Mhm.
labeled from Israel and Turkey, and their lawyers were like, "Hey, man, these artifacts they don't look too chill. Something's fishy about them." They're like, "Screw it, we don't care. We're opening a museum," and so they buy them all, get them out of the country, and what they found out later, because the feds were like, "What the fuck is this?" was that they basically just bought tons of stolen artifacts from ancient Sumerian cities that people just went there, broke shit, and gave it to them. And
So wait,
mhm.
did they buy these things knowing that knowing is the key part in this,
they
knowing that they were
they
stolen, or
basically their lawyers told them like we can't certify where these are from, and they didn't care and bought them anyway.
interesting? I'd have to dig. That's interesting. It makes me want
Yeah,
to dig into that and kind
the
of
thing is,
see.
like, if they bought them and they had like fake certification, maybe I'd give them a little bit more leniency. But their lawyers were literally warning them, like, "Yo, these don't like the documents are marked in crayon. Like, I don't think these are credible." And like
Huh.
the people shaking their heads are like hooded and like covered in blood. Like, no, take them. They're wonderful
Yeah,
artifacts. It's like the dude from the intro of Aladdin, like like the I'm talking about the merchant from the intro in
I know.
Aladdin.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like that guy selling him like 3,800 artifacts looted. And the problem that I saw with this, and the reason I'm opening with this is I just found out about
sure.
this
No,
and it's
sure.
wild. Is that ISIS actually made possibly billions of dollars doing this, right?
Shit.
And so the problem is when companies do this, they're not only like, basically stealing history from a country because these are stolen artifacts and they're like funding people who are going to go steal more artifacts, but it could possibly end up funding terror groups like ISIS.
So what I'm trying to figure out is like, and I know this is probably a very complicated web that's not as like, cut and dry as like someone necessarily like,
Mhm.
oh, we bought it. Like, I don't know their explanation behind it, right? Other than just saying, like I said, the lawyers saying, "Hey, don't get it. It's, we can't verify where it's from." I don't understand the decision making, but like, oh man, that seems really intense.
Something seems a little weird there, right? Like it's such a crazy story.
Like, how would they sell it? Like, I don't understand. Like, okay,
Well,
they bought these stolen artifacts. What was the like? Were they planning on selling them? Like,
well,
I mean, I
well,
don't
no.
understand
They're so the Green family, which is the family who bought it through Hobby Lobby, are
Sure.
a strong evangelical like Christian group of people,
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely,
Right?
yeah.
And so they're also been involved in some court cases around like Obamacare covering like contraceptives.
Yeah, I remember all that. Yeah.
And they were planning to open, and they did eventually open, a Church of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and they wanted artifacts to
Okay.
fill up the place.
Okay, okay. I see how this is coming together now.
Which,
Okay.
personally, hey, that's cool. You want to open a museum. I like people learning about God and faith and whatever, right?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I'm a Christian dude.
Yeah,
But
same here.
I don't think it's very Christian to be like, you know what? Let's buy some possibly stolen artifacts from another country,
Yeah.
to do this education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still like it just seems I want to know more of the story, right? Like I want to know
It's like
this
a
is
good
so
documentary, right? This would make an amazing documentary. Like the time
yeah.
Hobby Lobby fucking like stole tons of. It's just so
Yeah.
wild.
Well, this is something too when we get into the conversations about foreign policy and stuff like that, and I want people to understand kind of this is why it's super critical that I want, and maybe this goes off of foreign policy a little bit here, but I want people to understand when they see me specifically, the Doghouse Show, and why he's like, why do you? You have to understand that most of mine is I look at it from a factual basis and try to see. In other words, when I see an article, anyone who knows me knows that when I see an article piece or a journal piece,
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10 nowadays, it's not necessarily them presenting the facts and letting the reader decide.
Mm-hmm.
It's always kind of injected this bit of emotion, which is fine because that's kind of journalism to some extent. But
Mm-hmm.
I try to dig into this. So, like, for example, I've done this multiple times, specifically with elections. I've done this multiple times when it comes to illegal immigration and that crisis at the border and all that stuff. And I'll dive into the actual facts of what the journalist is looking at, right? Because 9 times out of 10, a journalist is taking a primary source, whether that be pictures from the border or a report from the border or something like that. And then they're constructing a story from that piece. And so my line of thinking is, I don't want to hear what you have to say. I want to see what the piece of paper says. So that's why I want people to understand is when they see my critical thinking, it's not that I'm trying to take up a position of, oh, this is conservative standpoint, so I have to take it from this point. It's I want to see what the facts say and then form my own opinion from that. I want to be the journalist, essentially, right? Like I don't want to be a opinion piece of the opinion piece, if that makes sense. So.
I think that's vital when we look at situations like this, right? And so I think it's important to go to, and while people like will judge the unbiasedness of the organization, go to like sites like generally like NPR is like something you want to go more towards. And I actually read the NPR article about this, and that's actually how I found out about it, which was wild to me, right? Because originally what I heard was, I hate Hobby Lobby, they funded ISIS. And I was like, whoa, okay, let's back up. And I look and like, okay, they didn't fund ISIS. Number one, this was in 2010. ISIS wasn't really like looting all this stuff. But they did buy, it was like a very tiny kernel of truth in a very overblown statement.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very important. The other thing I like to do is not only do I think it's important to get unbiased, like, sources or like somebody who's just going to give you the clean cut of like what happened and not say anything about it, but maybe hear a diverse set of opinions.
Absolutely.
And I specifically read a journal called Foreign Affairs, which is a very, very wide ranging set of beliefs. One week they'll have Joe Biden on, next week they'll have somebody who's like, I believe Henry Kissinger was right, and the next week they'll have, hey, I think capitalism's about to collapse. And so I really enjoyed that. Because I remember getting my first like magazine from them. The cover was like actually, let me see if I can show you it. Let me show you my two most recent foreign policy things on it. Turn on my camera.
Oh, there you go.
The future of capitalism, right?
Wow.
But then the next one was about just straight up like American strength.
Wow.
Like just such a diverse set of opinions.
And that's something that's really interesting to me that I feel like when it comes down to this stuff is it's like, you know, this is why I've always struggled with foreign affairs, specifically because in order for me to understand foreign affairs, I think it's super important for me to understand the history as well as the culture, as well as just the political atmosphere of that particular country.
Mm-hmm.
And being in the Middle East, it's also, you have the history that goes along with it is U.S. involvement in that particular region.
Yes.
And so specifically with the Middle East, which I know what you're pretty
Middle
good
East
in.
And a little bit of Asia, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why it's difficult for me, and that's why I've never really invested the time, because it takes a lot of research to understand kind of all of that into context. You know, it's easy for me to sit here and say from an American perspective, and I'm not saying I hold this opinion, but I'm saying it's easy to involve yourself in the Middle East and say, oh, fuck the Middle East, you know, oh, they don't care
Giant
about
glass
like,
crater. Yeah.
exactly. I want to understand their culture. I want to understand their history. I want to understand how our involvement, because again, I mean, I try to put myself, I think there was one time when I tried diving into it that I found was really interesting is I try to put myself into that person's perspective and try to imagine somebody who's in the Middle East and sees, you know, what they're hearing from their government, right? Saying that this is what's happening with the U.S. invading us. And I try to put that perspective into, I try to put myself in that perspective and going, how would I feel if I was a citizen and I saw another country in my country, you know, and how would I respond to that? And so that, again, that's why I've always said foreign affairs has always been very, very sticky for me, just because there's so much involved, so much.
I will never say that, like, it's weird saying people call me an expert on the Middle East, and I feel weird hearing that because I'm learning new things every day because there really is just so much, and I think while there are experts on the Middle East to an extent, no matter who you are, when you're studying foreign policy, you're always learning new things about history, new things about recent developments. I mean, there's stuff developing in every day. You got to think how many countries cover that region, how many tribes are within each country, how many ethnic groups, how many religions, how many because then not only does it cover that, because that's how most people think of it, just that, but then how many different political beliefs are within those ethnic groups and tribes, like the Ba'ath Party, people in Iran who wants to export the Islamic Revolution, monarchists within Saudi Arabia, and how those things are all like diametrically opposed to one another. Like, there's just so much, and I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to like American perspective, it's just that's too morally gray. It's a little too complicated. The Middle East, we're at war with, and that's just how we've kind of considered the Middle East, like a big block of war, you know.
Exactly. And that's something that I also understand too, is that even with that war, it wasn't again, mind you, entry level knowledge on foreign affairs here. So what I'm probably going to say is something you've probably heard a million times. But the war that we did have was originally with the Taliban, and it seems like that extended a little bit beyond the Taliban. And then there's also, you have the Taliban influence amongst the populace. And so it's a very entangled web of understanding that, to understand, has America been involved in the Middle East too long? Has America, you know, are we in the wrong area now? You know, first it was just, you know, my opinion, again, initial knowledge, it seems like once you eliminated the head, which was Osama bin Laden, you know, you would think that mission complete, right? I mean, we got the person who perpetuated those attacks on September 11th. And then you kind of start wondering, okay, when is this dying down? Like, when are we going to end up leaving? And it is a question that I don't, again, entertainment web.
I remember, you know, me and Lecture Fan recently had a debate. Did you get to see that?
I didn't. I was busy relaxing, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, I was busy not relaxing. And we went in we tried to go in soft, but eventually it got heated. And the disagreement I think me and him basically had was, I know just cutting the head off of an organization personally doesn't necessarily say like we're gonna weaken it or we're gonna like corrupt it and it's gonna go under, right? Because when we talk about Soleimani, and I know you've heard of it, we've been on similar
course.
shows when we talked about it, a lot of conversation hasn't been about, well, who replaced him? I'm sure you probably don't even know who replaced the guy. Most people don't. It was a guy called Esmail Ghani, who, if you thought Soleimani was bad, this is a guy who trained militias that ended up executing children in Syria, right? So, this is a person who's been working under, like, Soleimani for 2 decades, who also fought in the Iran-Iraq War, commanded troops, who's able to train Afghan and Pakistani militias to fight within Syria, has been involved in Pakistan and Asia widely, and been basically in a position in the Quds Force as deputy commander for like 2 decades. And then you put that person in Soleimani's place after Soleimani's built this giant, basically like asymmetrical empire, and then you say to me, well, we took the guy out, the Quds Force is done for.
No, yeah, I wouldn't I wouldn't go as far to say that it's done. You can't. And that's one thing that's complex about the Middle East, is that with all these different factions, especially with the military and stuff, it almost always seems just like the cartel, even, right, where you take out the head, there's someone that's already lined up to replace that person in the case of an emergency. I mean, that, and you can't, you would have to expect that with any kind of force, not even just the militias. You would have to take into consideration for any political party, even, right? Like, even here in the U.S., you have someone in line. There is a secession.
Yeah,
right?
if Trump was to like pass away, hopefully, God hope not, but if he did, and Mike Pence took his place, then after him, there's also another person. It's like a line of like 10 people. I think there's even like a protocol, like at every meeting of Congress or Senate, or if everybody's gathered in one spot, there also always has to be one person off base in case something horrific. Yeah, exactly. So like for 20 minutes, you could be president if something horrific happens.
Yeah. I don't know. And by the way, have you ever seen that show, Designated Survivor?
I have not, but it's an interesting concept for a show.
It's a great show. Fucking love it. You should definitely watch it. But that's the thing, right? Is like when I watch, like when I, and then that also begs the question then is, how do you contain this, right? Like without having an expanding military force in the Middle East. It's like if there is a line of secession and you take away Soleimani, do we then end up taking out the next line? I mean, like, it just seems like it could be an endless...
It's the thing, the problem when you deal with something like that, where you have 2 people at war, Saudi Arabia, well, they're not at war, but proxy conflict, Saudi Arabia and in Iran, who are diametrically opposed, right? I mean, Iran overthrew a monarchy, Saudi Arabia, monarchy, and is about exporting an Islamic revolution that is, like, diametrically opposed to monarchies, and they've been at conflict for a very long time, and then you have the Sunni-Shia divide, and not only is the government Sunni, it's Wahhabi Sunni, so it's a very, like, hardline sect of Sunni, and they're fighting in Yemen, they're fighting in Iraq, they're fighting in... even to an extent in Bahrain, not like with guns, but like, you know, on the ground, like undermining one another. Then of course there's Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and that's where Israel gets involved. Of course, they're involved in Syria. I mean, they're involved throughout the entirety of the region, and I think that when it personally, like I'm known as the hippie on Twitch. I'm a big peace and love guy, but I also know that you can't have peace if you don't have strength. I know that, I mean, like, when it comes to foreign policy, it's gray.
Yeah.
It's extremely gray. And I don't have the luxury of being always able to stand on a high horse. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I would love to never have to say, we're going to have to do this strike, or we're going to have to take this military operation, or we're not going to be able to kill this guy even though he's a monster, because the blowout could be worse than what he could do. Right? And that's the decision I had to personally make when it came to Soleimani about whether I supported it or was against it. Because not only was I against it, I've spoken at the University of Maryland against it. I've spoken on multiple shows against it. I've advised political candidates who are running for office against it. So it was something that weighed on me heavily. And when it comes to foreign policy, people have extremely simplistic views of, like, we're the good guys or the bad guys, good and evil. That's how it is.
Yeah, and that's what it seems like a lot of with the narratives I've seen is people, and understandably so, and I'm not blaming them for this, and I'm part of this as well, is that, again, it goes back to we're not actively in the Middle East. We don't know what's going on necessarily, other than what we see on our televisions or what we see on, Twitter or whatever, right? And so we form these opinions based off of that. And that, again, going back to what I've said before when we first started this conversation, it's like trying to get in there. I'm a critical thinker when it comes to this. So this is why.
Well, I hope you weren't an uncritical thinker.
Right. Well, exactly. And that's why I sit here when I do this stuff is I dive into this stuff, and I don't feel comfortable talking about foreign policies when all I'm going to give in these opinions is stuff I've read through Twitter or through, news articles, because again, the time it would take for me to dive into this is, I'm not trying to say this in a rude way, and I absolutely understand the importance of foreign policy, but my focus is primarily on U.S. policy and U.S.
domestic policy, right?
Domestic policy,
kitchen
exactly,
table issues, as they say.
Exactly. So, but that's interesting that you said the Soleimani strike, because even then, I don't really know too much about that, to be honest with you. Other than I know we struck them, and then there was that big debacle of could we enter World War III, and then ironically now we're looking at could we enter the next Spanish flu, and so it's it moved on really quickly, from that, and now it's kind of pushed back.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to foreign policy, while I'm not a huge fan of Joe Biden, he wrote an article in Foreign Affairs which I found very revealing, and he basically said, and I think Warren also said something similar to this. Foreign policy is not just, he actually said this at a speech as well, foreign policy isn't just like foreign. It's a domestic issue. It isn't kitchen table issue. What tariffs we place on what goods affects somebody's bottom dollar.
Sure,
what conflicts we get in with other countries will affect oil prices. It will affect whether your sons and daughters, I'll have to send them possibly to their graves. It's an extremely heavy toll, and I think that we don't give it enough attention. And I thought that was like a really kind of like good sentiment to push when it comes to like, we don't think of it as like domestic policy, but foreign policy impacts our domestic lives in an extreme amount of ways, even if it's just like how tied economies are around the world.
Do you think that we focus a little bit too much on the Middle East as opposed to, because like anytime we hear foreign policy, I feel like the first thing that comes to mind when we hear foreign policy is the Middle East.
To an extent.
And I think there's some reason and sense behind that, but I feel like some of the other foreign policies get pushed aside. Like, honestly, I don't even remember the last time I heard any kind of foreign policy to do with Africa. Like, I mean, I'm saying that in all seriousness.
Me either. Africa, from what I heard, is some of the most interesting foreign policy in the world, because you're seeing like fast-paced development the world has never like seen. Like looking how like Paul Kagame has transformed and stopped conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis and like united through this, but also his like lack of democratic values, but that also intersecting with like social programs, everything else, and like seeing that development around and seeing how China and America and Russia are all racing against time. It's super interesting, but I know next to nothing about the continent.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was going to say. I mean, Africa has been pushed to the wayside. I've heard from China a lot, specifically within these past 3-4 months because of the coronavirus, but there's the trade policy stuff with China. We had this stuff going on with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. We've seen that. We've definitely seen the EU and Brexit and that stuff being mentioned. Definitely heard about the Middle East. But when it comes to Africa, I think I've heard like 1 or 2 stories coming out of Africa about something or another. I think it was like a dispute or something.
You want to know what something amazing just happened out of Africa, and no one's talking about it? The South Sudanese Civil War just ended. 400,000 people died in that.
Yeah.
That's like more people than some people project for the Iraq War.
Wow.
And so you and that's not even to mention like the millions displaced from their homes, and a lot of these homes were like taken by other people, and like they're not getting their homes back. So like these are so many lives transformed or ended permanently, and this war just ended, and it ended not in like a blaze of glory or like with a winner. It ended with both sides just saying, fuck, I guess we should end it. And it just ended, and nobody's talking about it.
Let me ask you, it's a very, very broad question I'm about to ask. But what's your opinion on peace in the Middle East. Do you think it is achievable, and do you think it is achievable within our lifetime, my lifetime, or your life? I mean, we're damn near close now.
I think of course it's achievable, but whether it's in my lifetime, I can't say. I would hope so, and I would lean towards, is it achievable in our lifetime, like physically? Probably. The question for me, though, is about leadership and whether there's enough of it. Because I don't see a lot of it right now when it comes to the Middle East. I don't see a lot of people able to sometimes swallow their pride when it comes to like ending conflicts in the Middle East. Something recently cool happened, and it shows that sometimes when people are against the wall, they do it. But if they don't feel against the wall, they're not going to do it. There was a ceasefire in Yemen, one of the worst humanitarian like catastrophes in the world. And man, this, I don't want this to get too depressing, but in 2018, over 85,000 children died under the age of 5 just from starvation in that country, due to Saudi Arabia like stopping food from getting in there. And that's just children who under the age of 5, right? Not 6, 7, 8. And that's just starvation. And that's 2018. It's probably over 100,000 now. And that's not including bombs, guns, and all. And it just shows how devastating that is there. And that conflict's been going over 5 years, and Saudi Arabia got into it saying this will be quick and easy.
Yeah.
And so I look at a conflict like that where either side's not against the wall. And you got the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia who's willing to butcher journalists, and the Houthi rebels who see this as a life and death struggle. Neither of those people are in a position or have a willingness to swallow some pride and come to a political solution right now.
Yeah.
Maybe the Houthi rebels more so, but definitely not the Crown Prince at this time. And so what I see there is a lack of leadership from people who are unwilling to like concede on this or that issue. And that's what I want to see. Because I feel like when people talk about deals in the Middle East, it's kind of like everybody wants to get all their shit in one deal. Like, get everything they want.
Yeah.
You know? I remember when I talked about the Iran deal, which people can disagree with me on the Iran deal. I think when people talk about the nuclear stuff, I think that's a little bit, to be as nice as possible, a little grifty. But when you're talking about, hey, this doesn't deal with Hezbollah and their funding of these horrible terror groups, that's a lot more credible to me. Because I can actually see that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people will bring me this deal and they'll say, well, I want this to address Hezbollah, their influence in Iraq, the conflict in Yemen, their nuclear program, their funding of these other terror, and I was like, okay, so you want to solve everything in the Middle East in one agreement, and you want them to like cave on all their issues? That's not going to happen. And that's,
what do you think?
That's my problem right now. I think it's a lack of leadership.
Well, and this is the other question I would have too is, I've heard of people being anti-U.S. interventionist, and then I've heard people being pro-U.S. intervention. And so I guess it seems like, do you believe, and do you believe that there may need to be U.S. intervention to prop up those good regimes to take over that particular country, or do you believe that should be completely handled, hands off, basically anti-intervention? What do you think about all that?
I think people are very much polarized on this. You're one of two sides. Either you're like, let's throw it all the fuck over, or we just need to leave, right? And I think over the last 20 years, we've seen the faults of both positions. Iraq is an example of that being the bad example of intervention. Afghanistan was an example of something that could have gone a lot better, but didn't. I think Barbara Lee's criticisms of our goals being too broad and not narrow enough came to be true, because like you said, well, I thought we were just going in there like fight the Taliban or fight Al-Qaeda, and then like now we're building up and she was that was her specific criticism. Like, we need a very clear goal. Once we get it, we leave.
Yeah.
That'd be my similar criticism there. But then we see what happened in northeastern Syria, where we had 50 to 150 troops on the border Trump decides in the middle of the night to pull them out against the advice of the Republican and Democratic Party, and that leads to Turkey rolling in, and over 150 war crimes being committed, politicians being shot after being dragged out of their cars, children and a friend being beheaded. This was one of the worst ones for me. There were reports of people being killed, right? Which, happens. But then their bodies would be taken and then sold back to their families if they wanted to bury them. Just like by taking their phones, and so literally you have your son's killer calling you on the phone like, hey, you want the body? Give us $20.
Just out of curiosity, and I know we're like, I'm kind of guiding the questions here, but it's
fine.
It's interesting.
The reason why I wanted to have this talk is, number one, I don't get to talk to a lot of conservatives on Twitch about foreign policy, number one. And I respect you a lot. I think you're very diplomatic. I think you like to have conversations with people who are respectful, in my opinion. Like, a lot of people will go a lot harder. I think the conversation we're having right now is extremely respectful, and I like it. But
definitely no, and that's something real quick just before you go on. I do want to mention, this is why I've been making, I guess you could say, my peace tour, because I don't hold grudges. I know I've gotten to some Twitter spats, so to speak, but I don't hold grudges. So I try to, what goes on Twitter, that's my little cage where I'll get into little spats with people on stuff. But when it comes to face-to-face conversation, it's more productive to have actual conversations, inquisitive conversations, not combative conversation. Anyways,
and I also think it's important because most people aren't experts in foreign policy. Most people aren't coming in my chat like, so Dylan, what do you think of the recent conflict between Saudi Arabia and Qatar when it comes to Al Jazeera, or what about when it comes to the oil price conflict between Saudi Arabia? Like, most people aren't coming in with that. Most people are coming in with like, so what's the beef between Saudi Arabia and Iran?
Right.
And most people don't really want to ask that question because then they feel stupid, or they feel like, I'm in the foreign policy channel and I'm really going to ask them, so like, why did we invade Iraq? Right. And it's a weird thing to say because it sounds so basic, but I can tell anybody, most people don't, number one, aren't interested in asking that question, and number two, don't have the answer to it. So you coming to me wanting to ask my question, I want to give you that answer. And so you being someone who wants to learn and wants to come on, I love having these conversations because I get questions I wouldn't have thought of because I'm not looking at it from like a novice's perspective.
Absolutely. So the question I would have right now is as
Akio, thanks for the sub. I appreciate it.
There you go. Hey, Aiko. So here's the question I would have. A lot of the information we get seems to be from news sources, correct? Like, I would imagine that story you heard was from a news source somewhere.
Yep.
Do you think that certain news sources, and again, I don't know where you got it, so I'm not insinuating that it's CNN, right? Because I know some people are like, oh, he's conservative, he's saying fake news. No, but what I'm saying here is, do you think there's an agenda behind that, though, that maybe comes out of Syria or something like that may have a particular agenda behind it and may not perpetuate the full truth?
I have so many good stories about this because this is something I've had to learn painfully. But the first one will be about the story we just talked about with the Hobby Lobby. I actually heard about it because a cartoonist drew a comic about shoplifting at Hobby Lobby and why it was cool. And I was kind of like, that's kind of cringe, right? But then people made the argument, but they funded ISIS. And I'm like, fuck off. And then I researched and I'm like, while they didn't fund ISIS, this is pretty condemnable, and I don't think I'm going to be shopping at Hobby Lobby anytime soon. Yeah. And so that's how I learned about the story. It started from a really weird place, but that's how rabbit holes work. But I'll give you a really good example. Alison Albright was somebody who worked in foreign policy in the Clinton administration. And the Clinton administration placed sanctions on Iraq for a number of reasons. And there was a UNICEF report at the time that said 500,000 children died in Iraq because of the sanctions. Which, if that's the case, that is horrific, right? Absolutely. That's not even talking. That's children specifically, and the 85,000 number makes me sick. But 500. That's like when you get to those numbers that big, and I say this all the time, Oh my God, the burger just came back up. God, I got some Five Guys earlier today.
Oh man,
Some Grubhub. But when you hear of a number that big, you're no longer thinking about it like on the individual level, right? Because let's say you're thinking of some random kid you see all the time in your community, right? He's got a brother, he's got a mother, he's got a school teacher, a mailman, and all the people this kid affects. And then you see like a story about that kid dying on the news, and it's so sad, right? Times that by 500,000. And then when you think about it like that, it's like, oh my God, like that's too much for any one human to really think about.
Sure.
And so that's why that number like bothered me so much. And then recently, Allison Also Bright said something about how Serbs are disgusting, right? Which I thought, oh my God, that's gross, right? You don't say, and she said that like because there was a group of like Serbians protesting her because she took a foreign policy that was aggressive towards Serbia during some conflicts that were going on in that part of the world. And in it, I also posted about the 500,000, right? About the 500,000 children who died because that number scared me. And somebody basically came to me and was like, no, Dylan, that number is incorrect. I'm like, well, this is from UNICEF, right? This is a well-respected organization, which UNICEF is a well-respected organization. Absolutely. But what we found out, and people have come into my chat before talking to me about this, and I've had to correct them ever since then. There have been multiple studies after the fact, particularly by British medical journals, showing that those numbers are not accurate, and the level of mortality around children at the time were similar to the rest of the Middle East and Iraq as it was before. And that was legitimately Saddam Hussein basically rigging the numbers on that study to make people be more opposed to sanctions. And so recently I saw Destiny debate a neo-Nazi, and that person bring up that number. And then I thought like, oh shit, even though I'm bringing up that number because I'm considered the children, even though now I'm wrong,
sure,
that person's going to use that number, which is wrong, in a malicious way to push horrific beliefs.
And I think that's super important too, as well, is that I'm critical of every source. Like that, even like, for example, and again, I'm going kind of back to domestic policy, but it's what I guess you could say specialize in. When you look at like the border patrol, and the border and all this stuff that was going on there, I actually found it very interesting, because I found out that, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a time during the government shutdown where there's a bunch of reports that were coming out about children and the conditions at some of these camps. So I dug into this. I researched into it a little bit, and I looked at the people who were reporting from there, the people who went in there. And interestingly enough, I actually found out the name of the attorney that did the interviews with the children. So then I researched the attorney. I was like a fucking news reporter, dude. It was fucking awesome. And I ended up looking into this news report, or the attorney. And it turns out the attorney was a president for a organization that specializes in like getting kids out of camps at the border. And I kid you not, they actually used the word death camp in the actual language of this organization. She was the president of this organization, and she was the one that was being cited by many, many, many news sources. And I'm like, that's a very loose source to use because she has an agenda. Like, even if she didn't mean to.
Do you know the name of the organization?
Oh man, I wish I did. I have it saved. I'd have to look in my sources, but I wish I remembered it. It was a while. It was about a year ago, and I think I have a source similar to that. I'd have to look it up. But it was something like that. And you know,
what was the information they provided incorrect though?
Exactly what I was about to say with Barbecue House. No one knows, right? Because again, we're taking it from the attorney's word, and we've heard this a little bit from doctors, and I don't remember specifically the doctors, but I think the doctor had something similar to it as well. I think one of the doctors that went in there had the same issue. They were part of an organization or something like that, that looked at that. And again, this is the problem that we were seeing, that when it came to the border, not to drag this to the border conversation here, but there, you don't know much of what's going on in there, right? You don't have any firsthand accounts other than what's coming out from these people who are able to go to these things, right? And so this is the whole thing is when I'm critical down to the source. And so when I look at like what you were just talking about, foreign policy and what Saddam is saying, that's something that I'm always interested in, is because we're not on the ground, right? Like we're not. I'm in fucking Texas. Okay, the closest I have to the Middle East is the desert out in West Texas. Okay, I mean and that's about it. So it's like when we hear these stuff coming out from the Middle East, what filters are they going through? Is it coming out from a government official who may be corrupted, and then it's going into that other source, right? Or is it coming from sources on the ground? And so maybe I'm overly critical on some of these.
I want to offer a piece of advice, right? So I have, for instance, so the way my stuff works is a little bit more complicated, since like I write like reports about it, right? I have people I know on the ground who can tell me stuff, right?
Okay.
I have a few people I know in Iraq. I have a few. I don't have like any like I'm someone who works in the Iranian military. I have a few friends in Iran. I have a few friends in a lot of places, right? And so usually if something happens and is in their area, maybe I'll give them a call, or maybe they'll call me, right? Now most of them are just like civilians, right? Very few of them are in involvement in any of the actual political military actions. But that's always been helpful to ask, what's the feeling right now? How do people feel? What's going on? Or if it's something in their area, have you seen any news reports in your local area? Or did you actually see what happened, right? But then I also, but the majority of the time, 90% of the time, 95% of the time even, I don't have to do that. I have to go through a ton of sources, right? Whether it be a lot of stuff I hear through Twitter, a lot of stuff I'll hear through like CNN News or any of this. What I'll usually do is I'll either get a something from one of those sources or from Twitter or from somewhere, and I'll hear something happened, right? And while that's happening, I'll go to my usual list of sources, try to talk to them about it, or I'll go check what I find to be the most reputable news sites, right? And I'll go through that list, and the first time, and as I develop and try to certify, usually what will happen is one of the news sites comes out with something, right? And if not, and I can't get that certification right away, the more certain I hear about more reports on the ground, more reports from online, more stuff being posted on social media. What I'll do is I'll word my language very specifically if I do talk about it, right? I won't say Iraqi military vehicle attacked in Hama or attacked in Baghdad. I'll say we are hearing reports of an attack in Baghdad. We'll keep you updated. And then if something later, it'll be like false alarm, right? I won't even give too much details. I'll just say we're hearing details. Something may have happened. And I want to be very specific, because I used to make very early on, I used to make very blatant mistakes about like, oh shit, my favorite Twitter person posted about it, better retweet, and then like, oh, just complete bullshit, right? But when it comes to like bias, I'll give you a great example of some sources that I sometimes use. There's this YouTube channel and website called Southfront, which reports regularly on the Syrian civil war, right? They are the most pro-Assad, pro-Russian like organization you could ever see in your life, right? Their language is very like clearly like worded. Their graphics of like America are like purposely made to look a little bit more like stupid or like evil or whatever. But their graphics and information they put out are very useful and explain stuff very succinctly. So what I'll do is I'll basically block out all the very heavy emotional language and just hear this troop unit moved here to attack this. And that's what I'll take.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of exactly like how I approach situations. You know, I try to block out emotions, and I know emotions are absolutely necessary. And, you know, some people can call me heartless for it, and that's completely acceptable if that's, you know, how people address it. But, you know, I really do kind of like, I try to look at it from an objective lens and try to see what's really going on, you know, and it's interesting because again, you know, I'm glad to see that you've got some sources on the ground at least that can at least verify, hey, look, this is pretty accurate. You know, only thing I can advocate for is people who are maybe listening to what I'm saying is just be critical. You know, obviously don't be overly critical. I just looked at some of the lawyers that I could really very, very quickly look at. I don't think I found the one that I was looking for. But both of the lawyers I found that were talking about the detention camp, both of them were immigration attorneys at University of California.
What I will say is that, like, if I go to the Middle East, right, then my word could be discredited on a similar basis, though, right? If I start, for instance, everybody knows I have a very friendly view of the Kurdish people and some of the Kurdish militias in the Middle East, right? So if I'm in there and I'm talking about them, someone can usually be like, Dylan fucking bullshitting again with his pro-Kurdish propaganda, right? So I feel like maybe you could, while maybe like there might be some things that's fluff in there, you could look for like what are some like very factualized statements they made in this, and let me verify that instead of like
no, absolutely. It's not looking at the source so much, right? I mean, and this is what I'm saying is when you're with limited information, specifically like the camps thing that I, again, only because it's something I've looked into, not heavily, but you know what I mean? You know, when I'm limited in what I can actually view and verify, if they're saying, for example, if they're saying that kids at the camps are being beat or something like that, well, again, one is...
Or without soap or like stuff like that. That was a more like, common...
There's no other way really than the word of that particular person, right? I mean, you can try now. Of course, there's going to be witnesses that can come out, and you can have other things, right? I mean, there's obviously that process,
photographs, possibly video.
That would be even better, right? But when you're limited in it, and all you have to run off of is that person's word, you have to look at that person's credibility, right? But there are,
right?
Yeah,
yeah. So that's why I'm very careful. Like, I will never say this is the one report I have, unless there's like I'll do it sometimes, like the Iran cables when that came out, or the Afghanistan papers, like that was very clearly like, here's a huge dump of documents, here are the documents, you can see them. At that point you can't really be like, well, it's the Washington Post, really credit, like you can't do shit like that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. But that's why when people, you know, you can do the same shit with Fox News, you know, when people attack CNN and stuff, it's like different places for different things. There's sometimes where CNN is credible. There's sometimes where it's not. There's sometimes where Fox News is maybe semi-credible, and there's sometimes where it's not. And not to harp, I know we're kind of getting into beating on the journalist perspective here, but I really do want people to understand, too, how news articles work. Your local news station, 9 times out of 10, aren't creating their own articles. If you look at the little snippet above, it says, taken from Associated Press, or credit to Associated Press.
Yeah. A lot of Associated Press. It's almost like always Associated Press.
Always. I mean, it's everywhere, and that's why you also have to look at that. You can get like 5 different news stations, and they're all like going right back to the Associated Press. So really, you're not getting different news from different. You know, it's to be fair though, it depends. Like, for instance, if it's like local playground finally built, I don't think that's from CNN. Right? We got to be a little fair to our local journalists. They do it more out of love. Let's be fair. I'll be fair. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I will say to the idea of looking at, I would say like we should look at general trends, right? For instance, like a lot of times when we talk about like historical events that have happened, there are a lot of like, for instance, I remember when well, I can't say I remember when, but when the Holocaust was going on, there was a lot of like reports about something happening, right? But they're like, well, if you look at the source here, that's a Jewish lawyer, and I mean, can you really trust the Jewish? I mean, of course he has an interest in this one, and I'm not trying to put I'm just trying to, and so while one report or 2 reports, maybe we can be like, let's wait a little bit, but once you're getting like 20, 30, 50,
you know,
and we also need to say that people who have vested interests in something are going to be the people who are doing the most research and deep diving into these issues, right? You're going to get more stories from Kurdish reporters on the ground than French reporters on the grounds when we're in the Middle East talking about Kurdish issues.
Sure. You know, and again, it's also a very, very, and do you think, let me ask you, not to change gears here, but do you think that if Americans were to drop out right now, do you think that, like, what I'm trying to find is that balance of when is American intervention right, and how do you persuade the people of those particular regions that American interventionism is necessary, or do you believe in? And I'm sorry to harp back on this because I may have misunderstood you. Are you anti-American interventionism in the Middle East, or are you like you think there's certain points where it is, but maybe not military action, but more on the monetary side? Maybe that's where we need to intervene.
I would say I lean more against military intervention more than most of my colleagues, right?
Sure. Okay.
Most of the foreign policy community, the like actual like people who like work in foreign policy,
Sure.
are more kind of like, we got a hammer, might as well make that bitch a nail. Simple as that, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So I look at a lot of different solutions. Now, am I against military intervention inherently? No. There are examples where I think we should, like the Kuwait War was something where the United Nations was like, they're invading Kuwait. This is very obviously bad. We need to remove Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. Let's remove him from Kuwait. Like it was as simple as that, right? Like there was nothing as simple as that, but it was where like, even though there's going to be negatives to that, like if we get involved, people are going to die from our bombs. Civilians are going to die. Military personnel are going to die. And we're saying we're willing to put American lives on the line for this. And that's why when we're talking about military intervention, I think we need to consider that and think of conflicts more in that tone, right? It was not only a battle of strategic interest, but a battle of human beings against other human beings, which I don't think we think of it in that context like that much, right? Like when we think about the last report you ever heard about Americans dying in the Middle East, right? 20 seconds, 10 seconds of airtime.
Yeah, it's
not
very long
much.
anymore.
Here's a good example. Did you know about like 3 weeks ago, an Iranian-backed militia group killed 2 Americans in Iraq?
I do remember hearing about that.
Yep, and a British soldier as well.
A Kurd is a Kurd.
Did not hear about that.
And this
But I did hear about the 2 Americans.
And it was very obvious. It was from Katib Hezbollah, one of the organizations that are very angry at us and have been doing strikes at us, and the ramping up of strikes after the Soleimani killing. And it just kind of went by with nobody talking about it, right? And that's even less airtime than what an Iraqi civilian's going to get on the morning news, right? Yeah. Like an American dies, like you can like say about for 30 seconds how sad it is, which it is sad. But like 10 Iraqis die? Well, it's Iraq. That happens. It's Iraq. That's what Iraq's like. That's what it's treated like. And so...
That's a very good point. It's a very good point.
And I think so. It's for a variety of reasons why it's treated like that. But I want to look at every conflict through that type of lens. And if I'm willing to say this is worth that risk, this is worth those potential casualties, and weigh it against that, then I'm probably going to be in favor of that military intervention. Kuwait would be an example of that. Or if an active genocide was going on, that would be another thing. I'd be obviously in favor of a UN peacekeeping force or anything moving in there, or a UN-sanctioned invasion. So, but as you can see, I would be more restrained than a lot of our previous leadership in getting involved in conflicts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't know where I stand on it. Me personally, I feel like it's a military intervention seems appropriate when, a foreign government or a foreign entity attacks on our land, like, for example, the Taliban, right? I definitely believe that is good.
You mean Al-Qaeda, right?
Al-Qaeda, sorry, not
yeah.
Well. What's the difference between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda? I always thought they were kind of...
Al-Qaeda was the organization that attacked us, which
Kurd.
Osama bin Laden was the head of the terror group.
Mm-hmm.
The Taliban was a domestic kind of like hardcore Islamist brutal group within Afghanistan that was sheltering them. And so our invasion was like, hey, yo, you're sheltering them. And we're like, yeah, but can you prove bin Laden did it? And we're like, okay, go in there. And that's what happened there, right? So our main goal was to, and actually with our peace treaty we've recently made with the Taliban, like we fulfilled that original goal of the these terror organizations cannot operate in your country against America, which I think is a pretty like basic thing we could get like agree with anyone. Like, hey,
absolutely,
don't host terror groups that are going to kill our civilians, please. Right?
So was that? Are they actively? Are those particular Middle East countries going after these terrorist militia groups, or like actively going after them, or is it just kind of like
vigorously if they're against their interests, and not so vigorously if they're not against their interests?
Yeah.
Right. Like for instance, like Iran will fund their militias that are terroristic. They fund Hezbollah, of course. They're very open about it almost.
Yeah.
But also Saudi Arabia will fund certain militias that are horrific within Syria in opposition to a brutal dictator. And so you can see how morally great it is. Do you stay out of it and just let that horrible slaughter go on? Support the radical Islamist groups, the small amount, or maybe you try to go send guns to the rebels and hope they don't get to the terror groups that are like bad within those factions, and hope they get to the people you actually see as more moderate? Or maybe you actually side with Bashar al-Assad for strategic reasons or whatever reason, because even though he's a brutal dictator who drops barrel bombs on his population and shoots protesters, I mean, maybe that's better than than terrorists running your country. Or do you support the Kurds? And so it's so morally gray.
Do you think a lot of those Middle Eastern people, the citizens?
Hey, Solai, thanks for giving the tier 1 sub. I really appreciate that.
There you go.
Hey, man, you're helping me out today, man. I appreciate it.
Are the Middle Eastern citizens? I'm trying to use the right words, because it almost feels like it would be in better interest of the citizens than to not have these people making a bad mark on their country. But I would assume that they are kind of in that position where, well, if I go against them, I die. So, I mean,
if we're there, then we can help them, because then they have a fighting chance, basically.
Yeah, like that's kind of where I'm wondering is like with American back, even really now, I wouldn't even maybe go as far as say actual personnel, like boots on the ground. But even just knowing that American supports their cause, and I know that this gets into probably the Syria argument, because I believe we saw this in Syria, right, where I think there was kind of that backing from the American government,
the CIA involvement, and we did back aside the most moral side, what I would consider the most moral were the Kurds, and eventually we ended up backstabbing them anyway, right? So I mean, the problem that is with intervention is that, let's look at Iraq, for example, right? We invaded Iraq. We toppled Saddam Hussein, which is a brutal dictator. He gassed Kurdish populations. He no freedom of speech. I mean, Saddam Hussein, not my BFF. If I'm going to be completely honest, right? I snapped I snapped that friendship bracelet a long time ago.
Yeah.
Once we took him out, he was very open, fine, hang me. You know what's going to happen? The whole country's going to collapse. Yeah. Watch. And we killed him, and I would say one of the worst things we ever did post Iraq. My original criticism would be, don't invade Iraq. But now that we did it, there was this thing called debathification, pushed by, I forget the exact name of the U.S. politician, but he's widely hated now because he did this. And what debathification was is the Ba'ath Party was basically the ruling party within Iraq, Saddam Hussein's party, and all the government officials were basically members of the Ba'ath Party, and the members of the military were members of the Ba'ath Party. And we said, no members of the military are going to be part of the Ba'ath Party because they were the dictatorship's party, and no government officials are going to be part of the Ba'ath Party. And so what we did was we told all of these people, young men of fighting age, the majority of which did not even fight us. I think we only fought 15% of Saddam Hussein's army, which is crazy when you think about it, who only know how to basically fight in the military. We're saying, you're out of a job. Now take your gun, please give it to us, please. You're out of a job. You're all fired. Also, all the government workers who have all the expertise in the country, you're all fired too. Protests break out. They also have their guns from service. And then we have a resurgence of militant activity. And that's kind of where everything were like that was the final nail in the coffin for the Iraq conflict. Yeah. And so when you go in there, you need to think, number one, will the vacuum of power I create be able to be filled up by me? Number two, what's our post-invasion plan? Number three, how are we going to dictate power? Like, how are we going to interact with local cultural communities? And, like, it felt like we just butchered it every step of the way when it came to Iraq. Because not only was our, like, invasion itself, but, like, meandered with some mistakes. Like, we tried to kill Iraqi leadership in 50 separate strikes and failed every time. And we only ended up killing, like, civilians in those persistent strikes. That same thing happened during the beginning of the invasion. We wanted to do a mass strike to kill a bunch of leadership, took some information from an uncredible source, tried to kill Saddam, failed, and all that leadership escaped. And then you have debathification, and then you have, like private military contractors who did horrific things on the grounds and slaughters of, like, civilians. And if you're going into a country, you can't do those things and expect for it to all turn out cool and peachy keen. And so if you're going to move into a country, you need to, number one, know that this cause is worth it. Number two, know that civilian population is generally going to be on your side. Number three, if you're doing it for good reasons and not just strategic interests, you'll also probably have their, like, well, this more goes to number two, you'll probably more have their support, right? If you're doing it for moral reasons, it can have strategic interests involved. But if you're doing it for reasons of, like, alleviating a dictatorship, you might have better results down on the line. For example, we overthrew the democratically elected leadership of Iran, and everything there has been perfect since then, right? Like, you know, Iran loves us, right?
See, this is why. This is why. Because, see, as I'm listening to this, I'm like...
Oh, yeah, here's another thing. It shut down the government and essential services as well, debathification. Because now your bank teller couldn't be your bank teller. It was just like... it was complete fucking chaos. Looting ensued, in fact. But continue, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So, like, what I'm trying to form is like, what are the opposition points to these? In other words, I'm certain that with what you're saying is, you know... For one, what would the other side per se be to this? Like, I guess is my question, because, like, I don't. It doesn't sound wrong.
Other side to me, or other side to, like, just going in willy nilly into all these countries.
I guess I'm trying to understand, like, what would the counter argument be to what you're saying, and I know that's very difficult.
I can give you a counter argument. I've talked to a lot of neocons and people. The counter argument is that Iran is a terrible force in the world. Russia is a terrible force in the world. China is a terrible force in the world. The Soviet Union is a terrible force in the world. And you know what? We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We're America. But at the end of the day, though, we're so much better than them. And if we have to do a few shitty things or mess up a few times to be more dominant, it sucks that we have to do that. But would you rather have China or Russia or one of them at the helm who will do much worse things and kill even more people? We're actually just practicing harm reduction here, guy. So when we overthrow your democratically elected government in Iran, or maybe, you know, turn the head when Augusto Pinochet overthrows the government in Chile, it may not be the most moral thing to do. But at the end of the day, it means the better side wins.
Yeah, see, I don't even know if I would necessarily agree with that perspective. I don't know. Maybe my initial impression is, you know, me and my dirty centrist ways. Mm-hmm. It seems like there's a time for intervention and there's a time not for it. And if there is, it almost sounds like, from what I've been gathering from what you've been saying, is when there is intervention, is that it should be strategically planned with an exit strategy, basically, right?
Yes.
It should be like, you know what you're doing when you get into it. You have intelligence, and then trying to figure out, hey, what's that exit strategy? And from everything I can kind of gather,
what's our goals too? Like, what's our goals in this conflict, right? Because a lot of times we'll achieve a goal and be like, hey, man, that was pretty easy. Maybe we should go for the next thing. And that's actually what happened in Afghanistan.
Well, and that's the thing, is that's why I'm always kind of critical when people prescribe some of these arguments to the American military, right? And saying, because I think that there's more to it than just, I want to believe, and maybe this is me, kissing the boot, I guess you could say, but I want to believe that there is some strategy behind it. But because it's behind closed doors, we're left to assume by actions what exactly is being done or what's being said. And even then, like, this is why sometimes that I believe that everything that is said on the national stage is said very strategically, right? So even if, like, for example, I don't believe that if Trump were to sit here, now again, I know some people would be like, well, Trump's not 4D chess here, and that's a whole nother argument. My general belief is that if Trump were to say, fuck you, okay, in those so many words, excuse my language, to Saudi Arabia, it's not done without some kind of idea in the back of his mind of what he's trying to achieve, whether that be pressure via speech. And so this is why I'm kind of like, I try to see both sides, and I try to see, well, yeah, I can kind of see where I
got to give you a little bit of pushback, just a tiny bit, on the Trump stuff. I'm not a huge fan of Trump. I don't know if this is a shocker to anybody in my audience.
No, right?
I'm sorry. I was wearing that MAGA hat because I love the color red. Look.
Right.
my main problem with Trump, well, you know what? I have a lot of problems with Trump, but when it comes to foreign policy is that I don't think he knows what he's doing. And it's the same criticism I would direct towards Andrew Yang if he was president as well. Because I remember Andrew Yang was on the campaign trail, and they're like, so what'd you think of the thing that just happened in Bolivia? And he was like, well, I believe the War Powers Act should be in Congress. And people were like, what? That has nothing to what? That has nothing to do with Bolivia. And when it comes to Trump, I'll give you just one case. And this was actually how it occurred. Recently, I have a new sound notification for my for my Twitch, and it's just a statement from Lecture Fan. At the end of the day, occurred is occurred. And it's because I was talking to him about an instance where Trump was basically complimenting the Kurds in Iraq for things they never did. And it was like everybody on the ground was like, what is he saying? We didn't make no deal with Turkey about this. We didn't make no deal with Turkey about that. What are you talking about? And then he referred to the leader as Mr. Kurd. And what we found out was he was referring to different actions and deals that the Kurds in Syria had made.
Is a Kurd.
And what people realize is, holy shit, he doesn't see the difference between the Kurds in Syria with a totally different political structure and military force than the Kurds in Iraq. And I would see those types of mistakes, very kind of easygoing type of mistakes when referring to, I think it was like Estonia and Lithuania, he referred to them as this former Yugoslav nations. It was like, man, your civil war was brutal, and they look at each other like, what civil war?
I think I would be initially, okay, so for all my conservative buddies out there, how dare you? But no, in all seriousness, I think that I would probably concede to you that when it comes to foreign policy, only because Trump isn't a general typical politician that's been in, this kind of goes back to the whole, if you're a politician for 30 years, you have at least a bit of a knowledge of foreign policy. Trump really just came out of business. And I mean, I guess you could say he has some foreign policy knowledge in the sense of maybe foreign business dealings. But on a political level, I don't know if he would really have that backing. I think that a lot of it he runs off of, his advisors, so to speak. And even then, he
fired a lot of his advisors from earlier on, and
and he does a lot of these off the cuff remarks. It seems like when he does off the cuff remarks is when those slip ups happen. Like, I guess supposedly Mr. Curtin only taking it at face value,
Mr. Curtin
not having research team, right?
Here's the funny thing about that. He actually, because at the time they were a lot kinder relations, he actually said, well, I should take pride in that because he's stating my Kurdish identity with pride, and he tried to spin it in a good way, which I thought was pretty funny.
I mean, like I said, I think that he does. There's sometimes where off the cuff he does great, and then I think there's some other times where it's just absolutely shit, right? And I know anytime you mention Trump in any kind of circle, really, people are like, oh, Trump, and then you can go on for hours about what Trump has done good, what Trump has done bad, because some people are so opinionated about it, right? Yeah, and again, that itself can be a debate. What has Trump done good? What has Trump done bad? Because I know for everyone that there's maybe a good argument, there's a counter argument to that. But even hell, to be honest with you, and I know, and feel free to rebut because I'm just tipping on this part. I was sitting there initially, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, because I didn't do too much research about the coronavirus response. Initially, I said, yeah, Trump's probably saying some things off the cuff that probably aren't the greatest. And then I kind of changed it up when I did a little bit more research into the particular response about the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
There have been some things that I think I've heard or seen. I haven't dug too much into those, where people are saying, hey, he lied about these things. Again, have to research into those. And if he did lie, I don't know what the argument would be against that, right? I mean, if it's clearly a lie. And the only other argument that you would have against that would saying that maybe he did that to, pump up the American people. And, you kind of see where his mind's at with the economic. Anyways, we can go on and on about that. But, I just, and I hope that people understand as I go through this and I explain this, I hope that people understand where I come from on all this is I just try to take a critical look at it. And so it's not like I'm saying, I side with Trump because I'm a conservative. Okay. Hell, to be honest with you, I didn't even really label myself a conservative. I said, look, wherever my ideologies lie, whatever y'all decide to call me, because I feel like too many people nowadays try to freaking get in on that, label and stick to that label, whether it be neolib, Marxist, Leninist, conservative, neolib. It's just like, look, man, is my bike popping? It does that so many times.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up in a second. Let me just.
All right. How does it sound now?
It's still popping.
Still popping. Damn. Okay. Let me try this. Hold on. Give me 1 second. How does this sound now?
Oh, that sounds much better.
Okay. That's my blue snowball. I just did the input straight from the mic instead of routing it through voice meter. Anytime I route it through voice.
I would like to say a few things, right? Like,
sure, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like, yeah, there's a few things you could definitely say. Like, for instance, since this isn't something that's rarely brought up, but I think it's a good point. Since Trump laid off a lot of his staff from his original staff and like huge swaths of it, a lot of those people were the people he had who were trained in this specific type of scenario. And so with them gone, there was a lot of people who didn't get that early training from the Obama administration. And there's a few things like that. But then, of course, there's like a few things probably, like I think, like these daily press briefings that he's been doing are extremely helpful. Even though sometimes when he goes up there and the fake news, it's like, oh, but he brings up the experts. Like, that's good. Like, so there's some go and give. We would probably disagree on the amount of credit we would give Trump. But that can be talked about at a different time.
But in terms of foreign policy, to drag it back here, I don't mean to like cut our conversation short. I think we had a pretty honestly good conversation. I hope, I'm not offending you by leaving early, so to speak, but
no problem.
Do need to get going. But I do want to say that I did learn a lot. And I think that I find myself, to be honest with you, from our conversation and what little research I have done, being kind of in the middle, more leaning towards anti-interventionist. And when we do intervene, like I said, as long as we have an exit strategy and stuff like that, I try to put myself in the eyes of the people who are being most affected, which is the citizens of that country.
You know what? I think we might agree more than we both originally thought we would on this.
Probably.
And I will say, I will give you one last piece of advice. There's one news organization I recommend to everyone who wants to learn more about foreign policy, and that is Foreign Affairs, which they have a decent subscription. You do have to pay money, but I swear they have some of the most like informative foreign policy articles I have ever read, and they're from all across the political spectrum. So I don't think you'll be disappointed.
I'll have to do some more research.
Yeah, do a little bit of research, but that's the last recommendation I'll give you.
Absolutely.
And to everyone in chat as well.
Bringing me on, man. Yeah, and I appreciate everybody in chat. Look, I want y'all to know, as much as I may say this or that, look, I'm a good-hearted guy. I just try to look at the fact.
Yeah, I'm sure you have a big heart and a fly hoodie.
Do. Thank you. My hair's messed up, and in the time of the coronavirus where you can't freaking cut your hair,
I have survived without cutting my hair long enough, buddy. I can do a few more months.
Man, I can't do it. I'm so tempted to have the wife shave my head right now. But then people would probably, you know, saying if I put the word Trump with shaved head, let's just say it probably wouldn't look. Okay?
Yeah, you come in here with the gray hoodie, leaning over the mic. It's like, I got some things to say about our president. Like, oh boy, it's probably not gonna.
Oh man.
Yeah, Big Brain's gonna about to be fucking crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm probably not even gonna be on Big Brain tonight. To be honest, I got some things to take care of. With you, Minecraft has got me hooked. I don't know how the hell I missed out on this shit for the past 6 freaking years or 4, whatever, 8 years.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a Minecraft YouTuber.
Hey man, I love that mining thing and just being able to like get the resources and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, hey, maybe we can play Minecraft together sometime. I know
that's not the. Holy shit! Sorry, can't stop the kids. That's the second time someone has called me Jesse Pinkman. Holy shit!
You do kind of look like Jesse Pinkman, to be completely fucking honest. Oh, you just said
My
bro.
wife.
You just said bro.
Yes.
It's too late. You're Jesse Pinkman.
My wife sat there. I kid you not. My wife was at the nail salon. I went to pick her up or something like that, and this lady just tapped her on the shoulder. She's like, "Hey, by the way, is that man that was with you? It looks like Jesse Pinkman." I'm like,
you know what you should do from now on when somebody says that? You should just be like, yeah, I played him in the show, right? You should just do it. Just run with it.
And I know we keep going on here and stuff, but man, look, I've actually been in a few acting gigs when I was. Now I'm this skinny. I could probably play it again. I've been called Jesse Pinkman now. I've seen some other one yesterday, and then there was not Ryan Reynolds. Oh fuck, there was one other one. Yeah, I look like a tweaker. Yeah, I take that. I guess I'm skinny. I'm getting jacked. Damn it. Okay. Bitch. What is that? Is that how Jesse Pinkman says that? Anyway.
you gotta work on your bitch a little bit.
I gotta work on my bitch.
Yeah. All I get is Jim Morrison because the jawline, the hair. That's close to people get to know.
Hey man, look, it was a great conversation. I'm glad we had it, and we'll have to have a conversation again sometime. As far as anybody who saw our Twitter beef, look, I jumped to conclusions because you jumped in and right in that bunch where some other streamers were asking me to come on stream, and I lumped you in with them when I shouldn't have. I should not have done that. You treated me with most respect.